Okay, guys. If you can hear me, raise your hand, especially in the back. I'll know how loud I have to speak. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'd like to start this presentation with a question to get a bit of feeling about who are we. And the first question would be, who of you is or in any way was in the past using Scrum? Okay, I can see that's most of the audience. And I assume that at the same time you were using in some way retrospectives, right? Okay, perfect. So if you're attending retrospectives, every once in a while you had a situation where basically you've been told, same for us, we're being told that, well, listen, you have to accept this, this, and that. That affects all the teams. That's the way it is. That's how our organization works. There's nothing you can do about it. Live with it. And what I would like to do today is to show you how to solve such impossible cases can be solved. Because it turns out that there is a way to fix them. And yeah, I'll show you how we approach this problem. But first, who am I to think that I can show you something interesting? My name is Łukasz Koziel, and I'm working in IT for almost 10 years now. I was a Java developer for 6 years, or even more, and last 2 years I've been working as a Scrum Master. And I would like to tell you a story. I would like to tell you a story about a company. It's a company that it's okay. Right now, I'm hired at EPAM company. This is not about EPAM. This is about one of our customers that I personally work with, and that company, this customer, has over 150 developers, and it's operating in basically 4 different cities across 3 different countries. I know what you're thinking, these are 2 countries, right? But if you look very closely, there it is, Malta. Fantastic country, if you haven't seen it, I recommend it, it's very nice. Yeah, I recommend visiting. And there was a problem within this company. The problem was, with so many locations, there were dozens of different cultures, there were dozens of different points of views, and basically, it all led to one big problem, the blame game between different locations. It was always their fault, whoever they are, depends on where you ask, right? So it's never us, it's always their fault. So, as you can guess, this doesn't work very well, doesn't it? So, what did we do to solve it? To provide a bit of context. We came up with idea of introducing so-called tribes, which you might be familiar with, as Spotify is doing something very similar. This is not exactly the same thing. This is our, let's say, implementation of their idea. We got, in a way, inspired by them and did it the way we thought would suit the company best. So we started with those tribes. Let's assume that you have an IT department, all those 150 people and so on and so on, and you divide them into 4 groups. Basically, I'll use word tribe a lot throughout this presentation. Feel free to substitute it in a way with department or business unit, whatever name you feel most comfortable with. And yeah, basically those people we were split, and yeah, everyone in IT was assigned to one of those tribes. Let's assume that there were 4 of them. And I'll focus on a single tribe, the biggest one. It included over 50 developers and entire bunch of other people. I'll get to them. But what was this tribe? Basically, it was a group of people, and on purpose, what we did, we made it cross-location group. So let's say we got a few people in Malta, a few people in Poland, and a few people in Germany. So that group had to cooperate towards the same goal. And this was true for every single tribe. So it was divided across multiple locations. And each of those tribes was focused on a single domain. And obviously for everyone in the company, that was completely new experience. What was within such tribe? First of all, multiple development teams. In the case of the tribe I'm talking about, it's 8 development teams. Besides that, there is an entire group of product owners. There's even 2 guys we call tribe leaders. One is director of technology, the other one is director of product. A group of architects, group of Scrum Masters, and even a mysterious group called champions. We're still trying to figure out what they are doing. I'm not sure, but apparently something important. And these are basically heroes of our stories, the members of this tribe. So, we got a bit of context. What did those people do? What did our heroes do? Started with a basically description of our idea, how this should be working. We started with basically our vision, our domains, how we work. And as you can imagine, switching from one way of working company, where everyone in a single location, and you get to blame the other location, and so on and so on, and then you suddenly switch so much in the company, and you have to make it work cross-location, and so on. Well, it takes a lot of time and effort. And we realized that some of the things that we started to do, since we made the decision we have to make it that way, some of those things were working, some of them were kind of working, and some of them were definitely not working. And we were slowly getting there. But does it have to go that way? Does it have to be slowly? Is there anything that we can do to improve it? There is, but first I'll get slightly deeper into those areas and give you some examples of things that were not really working. You might be familiar with some of them because it happens in many companies, like maintenance of existing services is a pain for everyone involved. Or we had a very important project that we were working for months, and suddenly some compliance issue came out of nowhere, and you have to abandon everything to take care of the new project. Sounds familiar? Yeah. So you've probably had some of those problems, and we decided to take a break. Take a break and ask ourselves a question. How are we doing our work? How are we doing our everyday development, our everyday work? Because you can always focus on your current project. You can always focus on your current task. But if you're doing this the wrong way and you're never asked this question, you will keep, in many different ways, wasting time. So we already agreed that you know a magical tool that was supposed to help with this kind of problems, so-called retrospectives. But as we agreed, this is something that we can do on our team level, right? Even if you look at the definition from Scrum Guide, the retrospective is something you do on the level of a team where you inspect your team and come up with the plan for next sprint. How does this work with entire organization? So we came up with a slightly different definition, and we wanted to have, in a way, scaled retrospective for our entire tribe, for those 50 developers plus everyone else who was supporting them. So entire organization, let's agree. And obviously, if you're trying to change something bigger than a single team, you'll probably need a little bit more of time. So probably multiple sprints. Sounds simple, right? Well, it's easy to say, but how did we do it? You don't put 60, 70 people in a room like this one. Imagine, we'll try to have brainstorming to solve problems in our companies right now. Will it work? Probably not. So we had to come up with a plan. And we're doing those retrospectives for almost 2 years now. So we came to this question that I mentioned earlier. Okay, there are some things that are working, something that doesn't work, some things that are kind of working. And we decided to ask everyone in the department, what are those 3 areas? What is working? What isn't? And when we'll know where we should focus, we'll know how to improve it. And our plan to improve it was based on a structure you might be familiar with. Basically, in theory, all retrospectives should look like it. Almost none of them does. So there are 5 steps that a retrospective should have. Usually, they are skipped in order to make them faster, make them to finish them earlier. So what you do at the beginning, you set the stage. Then you gather the data from people who have this information. Then together you generate insights, decide what to do, and in the end, in some way you're closing this retrospective. And everyday life, it can be even thank you, goodbye kind of thing. We came up with activities for each of those steps. And those activities would be, for starters, explain what the hell are we doing. Because this is absolutely new. No one knows what is this. Why are we adding something additional to the meetings that you have anyway in your regular sprints in your company. So yeah, we had to explain to the entire tribe what are we trying to achieve. Then we had to gather the data from all those 50, 70 people, right? So we asked teams to get the data from them. We'll get to the details of this phase in a moment. Once we got that data, we can see that some problems are definitely local. They happen to a single team. Obviously, if it happens in 1 out of 8 cases, it doesn't look like a problem with entire system. But if something happens with most of the teams, we might have a problem there, which would be worth investigating. And yeah, once we know those areas, we can create and assign the action items. That's quite regular thing. And in the end, whatever plan we will come up with, we need to communicate it to everyone in the tribe. And you can imagine that such extensive, let's call it framework, would be kind of expensive. Meetings are expensive. The more people you get into the room, the more expensive the meeting is because they're not doing their regular work. They stop developing, right? So you might want to think about who is needed at each of those stages. We figured out, okay, explain the process to the entire tribe. As Scrum Masters, as facilitators, we can explain this quite easily. Then the development teams can provide us with input about what are our problems in the company because they're there. They can see that. They know what affects development. And later, whatever supporters we have in this tribe, all the product owners, architects, those tribe leaders, and mysterious champions and so on, could think about, okay, what kind of support we can provide to help with those issues. And in the end, we have to all basically agree, we have to all see this plan that we came up with. And the last question about this plan is, okay, when does each of those steps happen? Do we sit for a week in a room? Not really. So first step, that's simple. You can do this upfront. You can talk to your team after the daily, anytime, basically. Key is it has to happen in all the teams before we'll proceed. Then, gathering input from development teams, this can be done separately. Each team by itself gathers the data and then it's given to present in front of the entire company. And it is basically presented face-to-face, because such discussions are not easy. We are trying to touch some gentle areas, and it makes sense to gather whoever you want to have there in a single location, close the doors, focus on it. And yeah, basically discussing common problems of entire tribe and creating a plan to fix it, that's a lot of work. So we booked an entire day of workshop for that, and we planned that on the next day in the morning, will communicate whatever plan we came up with. Looking at the details, okay, first step was simple. Talk to your teams and send an email. No need to focus there. Second part, a bit more interesting. What we did was asked our teams to come up with 5 top priorities. It could be all things that doesn't work in their opinion. It could be all things that work in their opinion. It's up to them. However they will want to use those cards, it's their decision. The key is we limited it to 5 cards in order to make sure that the team by itself, in a way, figures out its own priorities. What are the key problems for us? Because we probably won't be able to solve all the problems in the world, right? Then, on this workshop, on behalf of each of the team, their Scrum Master was presenting in front of all those supporters their input, team by team. Same for the group of product owners, same for group of architects, and so on and so on. And when we gathered that entire input, we split it into topics, and in a way, we randomly ordered people from this group to split us into 4 or 5 groups, and those 4 or 5 groups were coming up with solutions for the problems we had. And then we placed all those topics on the wall, and basically next to them, we started to attach action items that we had for it. And in the middle of it, we realized, hold on, half of these are not really action items, because action item is something you can do, and then check, it's done. And we want to have some of those things, let's say, every time we start a new project, this and this should happen. So it's rather a good practice. So we separated this into 2 groups. Let me zoom in a little bit. So basically, we place the topics in the middle, action items on one side of those topics, and practices to follow on the other side of the topic. And this is quite theoretical. How about some examples? Yeah.
Practices to follow.
Yeah.
Let's say action team, executive
Mm-hmm.
action team. You are putting those practices to follow to the teams below, or this is for you?
Both. Depends on specific practice.
Are you afraid that if you put anything on the team, it will just collide with their...
And in some ways it did.
Okay.
So basically, some of the examples of what we came up with. Let's say we had a topic called Scrum Team Collaboration. And we realized that, hey, our product owners often have no idea that half of the team is going for a long-term vacation, and that affects planning in a way, right? Or they realize that there's a new team member on the day he comes to the office. Also affects a bit planning, and if you don't know about it, you will not plan for it. Also, imagine situations which you probably are familiar with. You go to a meeting where you're learning about requirements from client, from your product owner, from your architect, and it turns out they're not aligned. Then what? You choose randomly which one you'll follow. It would be a good practice for them to align up front, wouldn't it? So yeah, things like that, practices like that. And in the end, we got entire tribe to a huge meeting room like this one to explain what we came up with. And I'm happy that you asked this question earlier, because there are many things that we did wrong. This was our ambitious plan, which we felt would work. And in a lot of ways, it didn't work. So, our mistakes. First thing, getting 5 cars from the team seemed like a good idea. But if you get it from 2 teams, or all teams, it turns out that you end up, and that's literally what happened, having 70 different topics to discuss, and each of them is priority for someone. So if you try to conquer it all, you might do it basically wrong. You might fail if you'll try to solve all the problems in the company at the same time. The other thing, how do you guys feel whenever you end retrospective with coming up with some plan, an action item that you believe will work, and then it doesn't happen? Not really motivating, isn't it? So yeah, with too many topics comes too many action items. You might have good ideas and then miss time to implement those. So that's problem number 2. And we're just getting started with our mistakes. This plan seemed to be working very well until, like you mentioned, in the middle of this workshop, when we were coming up with the plan, we realized that, hey, there's not a single developer in the room. So it's harder to come up with proper solution for a problem someone else raised, who might have a good idea how to solve the problem in the first place. Also, what you'll do, assign it to the people who are not in the room, probably also not the best idea. We also realized that, hey, who's facilitating this thing? Scrum Masters. So if they're facilitating, they're not participating. And Scrum Masters who were close with the teams and could come up with the solutions which were heavily influenced by their experiences with the team also didn't have a voice. And like I mentioned, if they're not in the room, you're probably not assigning any items to them. So we ended up with a group of people solving problems raised by other people. Usually this affects the quality of whatever plan you'll come up with. So we've got 5 problems, and we're just getting warmed up. Because next thing, how many of you love sitting on additional meetings which goes for a few hours, which are added to your sprint, which was too short anyway? Not many people love that, and as you can imagine, listening about problems of 7 different development teams, not really engaging for most of the developers. So that's a lot of mistakes, and do you remember why we even started to do this in the first place? That we got this cross-location conflict. Did we do anything to solve that? Did we, in any point of time, put additional attention to the fact that we're talking about solving problems in a group of people who used to really badly blame each other? So we didn't thought about it up front, and we ended up with artificial harmony. Basically, people were raising those topics they were not afraid to raise in front of entire department. So the key topics were not mentioned during the first of those meetings, only during second, third, when people saw that it actually works and it's safe. But at first, people didn't feel safe, so they didn't share. Okay, there's one more mistake that some people loved. That mistake was basically our recipe for a disaster. Think about it. What did we do? We came up to entire department and we told them, guys, come up with things you hate. You don't have to have any idea how to solve it. You don't have to take any responsibility for it. You don't have to take any accountability. You don't have to be engaged in any way. Just complain. And they did. So, yeah, people were basically waiting until someone will fix their problems for them. And in a way, we encouraged that. We got everyone into the comfort zone and told them, okay, don't worry, someone will solve it for you. So that's a lot of problems. Maybe if it's so bad, it's not worth it. Maybe it's not such a good idea. And at the same time, we got some feedback. We got feedback that with all those mistakes that we did, all those problems, everyone agreed. That's where we screwed up. But we already have 13 top priorities, top unsolvable problems solved. 15 more about to be solved. So overall, we're getting better as a tribe. It turned out after a year of having things like this, for some magical reason, this was the only tribe that was solving its problems. it turned out that with all those problems, we were able to, let's say within a year, I gathered some data in total. We were able to introduce 42 improvements, which were considered we cannot solve this by ourselves, within 28 sprints, so basically a year. That means on average, not on a good sprint, not on a very, very unusual sprint, on average, all year long, you solve at least one top problem for your organization. It's up to you to decide if that's a lot or not. I'd like to give you some examples about what topics we mentioned, and in a moment get even deeper to see what actions we came up with, because it's really theoretical so far, isn't it? So yeah, some of the topics mentioned were, for example, target architecture and concerns related to it raised by our architects. For example, that the new projects we're doing are not really pushing us towards the goal we came up with. So maybe we should change something about that. Or about, okay, end-to-end responsibility topic. This was one of the bigger ones. In your companies, are you responsible for logging, monitoring, checking the basically whatever monitoring is showing after the deploy? Are you responsible for deploy? Are you sure that everyone from your company would answer those questions the same way as you would? It turns out that in many cases, responsibilities are not as clear as we hoped. And yes, some teams are doing, in a way, better jobs, some teams are doing worse job. But we even got to smaller topics that was concerned by smaller amount of people. For example, someone was concerned with tracking time in Jira because it was taking time, was counterintuitive, and so on. So all kinds of topics can be raised there. And getting to some specific actions that we came up with as the results of some of those retrospectives. Who of you is working with microservices? Okay, quite a few people. Could you name all the microservices you've got in your company and what they do? Because we realized, okay, we've got like 60, 70 microservices, and we're slowly missing out. It turns out, yeah, we could use a document which tells us which of them is doing what, because if you hear about it for the first time, might not be so obvious. Okay, another question. A lot of you are working with Scrum. Who can tell who are his stakeholders? Not a lot, just few people. And it was the same problem for us. We, in theory, should talk to them every 2 weeks, right? And we don't even know who that is. Who are the mysterious them, even in internal project? So yeah, and also, we mentioned this topic at the beginning of presentation. Sudden project. We all love sudden project. That's forced us to stop working on whatever we're working at the moment. Do you have any plan for these situations? Because we didn't. It was a huge question about what do we do now? We abandon it? We finish this one task we're doing? So yeah, we came up with a lot of answers for the questions we're having before we started this thing. And there is one thing that I really liked that we managed to solve in the process in a way as a nice addition, almost by accident. Our original problem, this conflict, it's their fault, it's our fault, it stopped. It turned out that now all we argue about is what is the best way to go? How should we solve those problems? We stopped blaming each other, we focused on the problem and yeah, started to think about solutions together. So, I mentioned huge amount of mistakes and some feedback. I also mentioned that we're doing this procedure in a way for almost 2 years now. And Do we keep doing those mistakes? Of course not. We learned a little bit from our mistakes. We learned our lesson, and we came up with some improvements for it. So we tried to get better from all these problems that we had. And what did we do to solve those problems? First of all, participation. Who is taking part in each step? Basically, it switched to each step is for volunteers. No one is forced to any of them. People don't have to come with 5 cards if they have no idea what to complain about. No. You've got nothing to complain about, you don't complain. You've got something that you're worried about, something that you'd like to fix, perfect. You have the proper path, the proper tool for it. You can get with this idea you have for all the stages. You can participate as a developer, as Scrum Master in every single part of this process. Besides that, I also mentioned that earlier we couldn't assign any of those items to people who are not in the room, right? So in a way, we ended up having everything on either leaders of the tribe or Scrum Masters, and sometimes those champions, but that's a different thing. And now we could assign it to anyone who was interested. So basically, you've got this idea, come with it, take responsibility to implement it in real life. You'll get all support you need, and it will happen if you want it to happen. And then we learned also that it makes sense to communicate that something changed. Because if, we introduced some changes and people have no idea about it, maybe it didn't make that much difference. Maybe people still think that next time they'll work on this particular problem, it will be the same story. And it's not. It won't be, but they don't know that. And we also introduced limits on how many action items we're taking. Because if you'll try to solve 70 problems at the same time, you will end up with half of them half done. But if you'll put some extra effort and within that group of volunteers, sit and together prioritize the problems that we are having and focus, let's say, on top 5. Maybe top 10 if you got many volunteers to handle them. Then with such limits, before next meeting, you will know that, okay, we didn't solve all the problems, but we solved those that we agreed that are the most important. I mentioned that we started to include developers. So in a way, we decided to open our doors a bit wider, and why not open it even more? One of the things we realized was one of these other tribes is called infrastructure. Sounds familiar? Turns out that whenever you try to get to production, we tend to have a lot of problems with them, with the cooperation we are having. They're busy with work, we don't know their procedures. Dozens of problems related to this single area. So why not include them? Why not invite them to this meeting? Why not talk to each other and learn? Okay, all the tribes are complaining about working with you guys. Let's sit together and think how we can do it differently and what we can do about it. And it turns out that suddenly, and this tribe things can get done. We can cooperate with them. We can understand what problems they're having from their end as well. Get some feedback both ways. Okay, so opening the doors a bit wider helped. So why not open it even more? We even started to have posters to promote it and to encourage people. We came up with this when we figured, okay, we'll not force anyone to come. Everyone's optional on this meeting. But it would be kind of a shame if no one showed up, wouldn't it? So we tried to encourage people with some posters and so on. And it worked in a very different way than I expected. It worked in such way that people from the other uninvolved tribes got interested. They wanted to see it. They heard that we are having something like this, so hey, can we join? We said, sure, go ahead, join. And yeah, after seeing what we're doing, how it's working, and that it brings value, they started to have their own retrospectives like that. Not the same ones. For example, if you have, let's say, 20 people instead of 70 people to facilitate, you can do it in some smaller, simpler ways, and that's what they're doing. But the goal is the same. Get people from your organization, from your department, you name it, get group bigger than your regular Scrum team and solve bigger problems. Besides that, we decided to make it a bit more fun. Well, I mentioned it wasn't engaging in any way. So obviously there's not amazing amount of things that you can do, but there are some things. You can get some food there, you can get some drinks there. We even came up with a small competition where we separated people into teams. They were competing for this box of Coke, shared with everyone later. Basically, think about what you can do to make it more engaging, more fun. Okay, problem fixed. The other thing is, I mentioned sometimes there are problems that you're not comfortable speaking out loud in front of 70 people. That's understandable. So recently we had an experiment which we called a laundry day. It was a small, regular retrospective for basically this kind of topics. You feel that there is something you cannot share in front of everyone? Okay, we'll get there, we'll discuss this in smaller group of people who are interested in doing something about it. And it turns out that there were some topics that we can raise in such situation and some additional improvements that we can introduce. I also mentioned earlier about limiting input. But the truth is, if you ask people to come up with up to 5 cards, they'll come up with 5 cards. Every team. Everywhere. And believe me, a lot of them were kind of forced, just to make sure that we got to those 5, because if we cannot come up with that much, then we're probably not trying hard enough. So instead, the limit is in a way natural, because amount of people who will raise their hand when you ask for volunteer is in natural way much smaller. So if you're limiting in a way to people who are willing to take action, who really care about the problems they're talking about, they can come with as many problems as they can see. The more the better, to be honest, because you know that it's really important for someone. So, our story, in a way, has a happy ending with a lot of improvements. We started as company like every other, and yeah, with a bunch of problems to be solved. Over time, we learned from our mistakes, and I hope that you'll be able to learn from our mistakes as well, and to start your own story, similar to ours. Your own story where you will take a break, and you in your company will ask the same questions. You'll stop focusing on projects that you're doing for a short moment and start thinking about, is this the way we should be doing it? So yeah, this is in a way my call to action for you guys. And that's it from my end. I booked some time for questions, some discussions, so I'm all yours.
Doing Scrum of Scrums, because this is the first idea that came
Okay.
when you have multiple teams and you want to. This is something pretty natural for
Mhm.
Scrum as well, because this is a natural thing in Scrum Guide. I mean,
Okay.
not in the Scrum Guide, this is at present Scrum Guide, all the bigger Scrum Guides
Mhm.
make Scrums.
Okay, Scrum of Scrums. We're doing that, but not for all the teams. We're doing that in projects where teams are cooperating closely. Let's say we got a project which we have to finish within the next 3 months. Obviously, it's too big for one team. We start those, let's say, 2 teams to cooperate very closely. They have Scrum of Scrums every Monday, let's say. We even got to the stage where those are two teams from two different locations. We got to the point where one guy is traveling to the other location every 2 weeks, and from this location to this location also every 2 weeks. So within a month, there are two guys who are for a week working with the other team just to share the knowledge in a way, to make sure that this knowledge isn't contained within a single team. And within the Scrum of Scrums, we basically learned three things. What were we doing this week and how this might affect the other team? What will we do within upcoming week and how this might affect the other team? And do we have any impediments? So with that, there's barely any room left for seeing what improvements we can have on larger scale.
Small unit, they have their own retrospectives, right?
Yes.
And they are responsible for only fixing their own problems within the team, and the bigger scaled retrospective is for the problems that are bigger than the team, or you can share the problems with the team, with the organization at the team level, and the Scrum Master responsibility is to put it up.
Okay, you can have it both ways, in a way. That's also something that we're doing, let's say within the Stripe, where we have 8 development teams. We have, let's say, 5 Scrum Masters in total. And we also meet on weekly basis, where we try to basically notice things like this on a regular basis. So you will not have to wait until the next Stripe retrospective, as we're having them once every 3 months. We used to have them once every 6 months, but we came up with idea that, okay, let's have less items, but more often. Any other questions? If no, then thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for listening. If you'll have any questions later, I'll stop by the EPAM booth after this talk. Feel free to grab me there and yep, ask whatever questions you have on your mind.